A few weeks ago, Australia was in ruin. 1 point from 2 games to start the third phase of World Cup qualification. A disaster. The coach resigned. Today, 4 points from the last 2, including a resilient draw away to one of the toughest trips in Asia, Japan. A result that would have been snatched at if offered beforehand. Suddenly, the Aussies are second in the group, in the automatic qualification spots to North America 26, with the chance to go into a clash against Saudi Arabia in November, with momentum to clear some air to the chasing pack. A few weeks is a long time in football. It's the national team up first, and then we'll wrap up the final 3 sides of our A-League men's season preview. On the eve of the new campaign, the wins and goal difference columns are reset, thankfully this year in the right order. Optimism is high and expectations are ripe on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight is Jacob Stevens. Jacob, there's a lot of news to go through, but the fact that goal difference is finally back ahead of wins in the A-League tiebreaker system. I don't know what phase it is, but it's the best news of the week.
Yeah, common sense prevails for once. And I don't even remember. I don't think they announced it, did they? They didn't make a public announcement. It was just somebody happened to look through the rules, the competition rules, and find out why victory.
That's why everyone was so enraged, because no one explained it properly.
Yeah, so it's good to have that rectified. So
Christian Montegan, once again, I think you've beat me on the intro 3 or 4 times now. You're making a habit of it.
I just wanted to add in my 2 cents.
No, sorry, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just getting competitive. Will Booth as well to round out our panel today. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I'm always just sitting back waiting politely. So good to see you all.
I do try to rotate around who I go to first, but I don't keep a record or anything. So I apologise if I leave you to last too often. But we'll get stuck in. First off, we are going to go to Australia's 1-1 draw with Japan. Christian, let's start at the very beginning. This game, the drama of this game started hours before kickoff. Australia's team bus was delayed to get to the ground. There was a traffic accident on the way. The team and the backroom staff spent over 2 hours on a bus trying to get to the venue. They only managed to get to the ground and emerge for their warm-up out of the tunnel at 28 minutes before the scheduled kickoff. That's per Joey Lynch, who was on the ground in Japan. Apparently, both Football Australia and the Japanese Association asked the AFC for the game to be delayed, and that appeal was inexplicably really denied. I don't know, though. Maybe it set up this kind of backs against the wall kind of attitude that we know the Aussies love to play into so much, and maybe that's what this gave them a little bit. And maybe Japan knew that as well. That's why they wanted to delay the game. They didn't want the Aussies with that siege mentality.
You mentioned the backs against the wall mentality. Jackson Irvine actually came out after the match and said that was part of the reason that gave us a bit of extra motivation during the match, because they were actually at the point of just laughing at the whole situation on the bus to say, okay, everything's going wrong. We just have to take it in our stride and just cop it on the chin. It is what it is. And obviously it's not ideal. The odds were firmly stacked against them even before this scenario. And then to have that happen to them, it must have been just so draining to think, oh, okay, here we go again. We've got no chance here. But no, to Australia's credit, you could see it during the game. They stuck to the game plan. They could have easily been rattled by the circumstances of what happened previously. And, I think the separate discussion is the game should have been delayed. I mean, at least, an extra 15 to 20 minutes. I think if common sense prevailed there by the AFC, then I think no one would be having any complaints. But, for Australia to have I think it was 35 minutes, by the time they rocked up to the game and then to kick off, that's just not enough time for a World Cup qualifier. This game of this magnitude, it's inexcusable, really. And to not come to an agreement to say, okay, we're just going to prolong the game for a little while just to at least get the away team settled in. But no, they wanted to go ahead with it. And, obviously Japan would have been licking their lips to say, okay, we've got a real advantage if we didn't already have one already. But no, Australia, like I said, stuck to their plan well. You could see the defensive setup was really strong the whole game. And we'll touch on the tactical analysis a bit more now.
Will, what really baffles me about this decision as well, like the AFC as a continental federation, they are there supposed to be serving the teams and the football in the countries. And if you have both participating teams asking for this, I understand that there's probably certain broadcast requirements, but both teams are there asking for the delay of game. I don't really find a suitable reason for them to say no to that.
Yeah, no, exactly. It seemed pretty unreasonable, and it was honestly good on Japan that they also put their hand up to get it moved back, so it was a level playing field. But yeah, I'm not sure of the local kickoff time exactly. I don't think it was too late. So if it was a broadcast issue, the game wasn't at a terrible time. I'm not sure exactly what rights holders they're beholden to that they're trying to please with that one, because it just made absolute sense to give them half an hour there at least. So a bit of a baffling decision, definitely in that respect.
All right, well, let's get stuck into the game, Jacob. It was a very resilient performance defensively, at the very least, from Australia, who, under Tony Popovich, we know he's the kind of coach that can set his teams up well to do that. It was 2 own goals, of course, in the end. Fun stat for you: it's been put around the place now, but over 8,500 World Cup qualifiers for the FIFA Men's World Cup, and not a single one of them has finished 1-1. With 2 own goals before this game, which is pretty cool. But, Popovich, he set up his team to be able to be really resilient in that way, and they got the job done.
Yeah, and you offer everybody a 1-1 draw against Japan away from home before the game, and everybody takes that, right? I think the thing that was perhaps a little bit disappointing was that Australia did go ahead and managed to grab that goal early, and then before that, Japan didn't look massively threatening. They had most of the ball, but couldn't really create many good chances. And it just happened to be another own goal that scored for Japan, which I think, to be honest, is pretty fair. I think it was a pretty fair result because, Japan had all of the ball but couldn't break through. Australia defended really resolutely and, couldn't make a lot of going forwards, especially in transition. Jordi Boss, I thought, did really well in winning the ball in the defensive third and carrying it forward into the midfield. But once he got there, the options weren't quite there for him, and it sort of broke down again. So it was sort of these 2 different, really, really different sides. You saw the technical ability of the Japanese wingers, having at times a field day against the wing backs. Although I will say that I thought Miller had a fantastic game. Coming up against was it Mitoma on his wing. That's one of the toughest players to come up against one-on-one on the wing anywhere in the world, and he managed to do a pretty decent job of it. There were times where he did get beaten and he played a bit perhaps a bit too passive at times, but for the most part Mitoma just couldn't get a foot in the game, and I think that's because Miller had a really fantastic performance. But no, 1-1, you take those, and I think that it showed that Tony Popovich is going to still be Tony Popovich, even though it's the Socceroos, right? He's not going to drastically change the way that he does things. And we mentioned this on the live stream, is that he likes to build his teams up from the back forwards. Make sure you have a really strong, solid defense to build around and go forwards from there. And that's clearly what he's doing here with Australia. Yes, okay, sure, the game called for having a more defensive approach because you're up against Japan, but it's also a case of, I still think this is what we're going to see from Popovich's Australia sides. I don't think we're going to see a massive change in that capacity. And we know that he likes to, switch out personnel rather than tactical adjustments as his big thing to make changes during the game. And we saw that again in this one, although he did leave it a little bit later than he did against China. But I think that's because he didn't want to ruin what was a good thing at that point. And it wasn't until, later on when the game's at 1-0 and you're just chasing that goal and seeing if something sticks in the final couple of minutes. You bring Goodwin on, got a yellow card, which is obviously big news because that means he misses the game now against Saudi Arabia in Melbourne, which is going to be huge for qualification chances. And that's a big player to be losing as well. Obviously, the impact he had in that game in Adelaide against China, one player of the match, was fantastic. It was Hrustic who got the nod over him in this one, which I think we all thought was perhaps a bit interesting to see, and it didn't quite pan out. I don't think he had much of a say in the game. But for the most part, I thought Australia played admirably well. And I think that, again, Jason Guerrier comes in over Deng starting this time and, again, has a pretty flawless game. There weren't too many times he made mistakes, both in and out of possession. So, no, I think it was a really big tick for the side because it showed that they can still play really resolute and good, solid football, even if they're not having the joy on the ball that they normally do.
I wonder, Christian, we know that Popovich doesn't like to change his formations around that much, but I wonder if this system that he's playing does allow for little minute changes that you can do in different games, in different game states. We saw, probably more so than the China game, those wing backs really pulling back out of position to create a flat 5. And then in the kind of middle line as well, you had, the two base midfielders, and then sometimes a front three with those inside forwards, but then those inside forwards could also drop back and form a flat four in midfield as well. So it's little things like that I think they did in this Japan game that they didn't do it against China, that maybe actually does offer just a little bit of difference, so you can shift between that more defensive and attacking setups.
Yeah, I think the difference here, obviously with a more defensive setup away from home that Jacob touched on, it was obviously expected given, our slim chances of getting a result in this match. I think if you go to a more defensive approach, then you can afford to make a few more adjustments in your starting 11, as opposed to if you want to take the game on a bit more against another opposition, for example, like a China. So, Jason Gary was the perfect example. He slotted in really well. I thought got man of the match as well. It was absolutely terrific. To be honest, I was not a fan of his selection pre-China, because I thought, okay, he's had one cap since 2016. Is he the answer for Popovic in this Socceroos side? Given Jakarta's injury, is he the answer? And he's proven me absolutely wrong. And I've seen a couple of comments on social media saying the exact same thing. Just the way he held his line, and not just him, the whole back line. That whole back five throughout was, really solid. My only real criticism, especially in the first half, was we gave away so many cheap balls and just too many errors, in possession. If we just kept the ball, for 1 or 2 minute spells, at least settle ourselves down. But, just these cheap turnovers really cost Australia. And it was surprising that Japan didn't capitalize in that first half, because that's a side who you expect to really dominate and punish those really lapses in concentration. Luke Bradden was very underwhelming, got taken off after the break. He was another eyebrow-raising selection pre-match. No one expected him to start the game. It was little things like that, because obviously we had one shot for the entire game, and our goal came from an own goal. And Mitch Duke said after the game he was just feeding off scraps. He couldn't really have an impact in this match. So, in terms of going forward, it was a slight disappointment to see. We do have the attacking talent available. You've got a good bench as well in terms of depth, but it seems like Popovic, this is going to be the norm, as Jacob said, moving forward, that more defensive-minded approach. And we did expect that coming in. It's not like, it's any surprises here with this Popovic game style. But away from home against Japan, you can understand it more. In different games going forward, though, at home against Saudi Arabia, for example, I think more criticism will come on Popovic if we see a similar style or a similar approach. I definitely want to see that improved, going forward into the attacking third. Otherwise, I think there will be more questions to answer.
Let's break down some of the specific personnel choices, Will. You got Joe Gauci in goals, who started both games. So, I would say now after that he's just the pure number one. That seems to be his standing at the moment. You've got Lewis Miller on the right wing, who played very well in both games. Jason Guerrier is that kind of player that's slotted in so well. He came on for Thomas Deng at halftime in Adelaide. That's the kind of substitution that perhaps Graham Arnold wasn't doing. He was waiting a little bit longer, where Popovic isn't afraid to make those changes at the half. He came in and did really well. You've got Burgess and Rouse is probably a little more experimentation. You could take either, with Sutar there as well. Geordie Boss, we all think, played exceptionally well. Then in the midfield, Luke Bratton was probably a bit of a weird one, but I can live with that, and I put it in the same vein as Frustich as well. Like, you've made a couple of these experimentations with, let's say Goodwin in that half space and Miller out wide and Yazbek coming on at half time, right? You got to experiment somewhere. So that's why, I can live with, the Frustich selection and Luke Bratton as well, because some are going to land, some are not. And that's just the process of figuring that out. And then, obviously you're in Klunder in that half space. Riley McGree came on and did really well. That's probably his spot to lose now, Will. And the only probably question mark is, after that is maybe the striker position, and maybe if Cassini Yengi comes back fit, does he push Mitch Duke for that spot? But I think Popovic is, taking the time to experiment in some positions, and I think he has learnt a lot probably.
Yeah, I think that's just, the phase we're in right now is this working things out phase, and that, that's the reason that we're seeing these selections such as a Bratton just chucked in there seemingly out of the blue for a lot of people. I do think a lot of players that you mentioned, have definitely earned spots. So Guerrier looks made to play in that back three, in the outside of that back three. It always has been throughout his career a question of is he a right back, is he a centre back, and he's done either at a pretty good level. He's performed in either of those roles, but I think he's found his home at back outside of a back three. The Gauchi one is that's a bold call. I think that Popovic has made, but I think the correct one and one a lot of fans were asking to see, and he's really shown confidence that you maybe wouldn't have expected straight away in such important games. It's not like he has had a friendly before and experience like that, but to come in as the number one in qualifiers like this and perform like he has, we saw it in the games that straight away in the first minute of each game he was playing the ball between the pressing attackers and really comfortable under pressure from the front line. So no, good to see Gauchi, and I think he's done enough as well. Burgess over Rolls is another one that's to be figured out. I think Sutar is he's just got his spot for now. It's not under threat now that Chikati's out, unfortunately. So Burgess, I think for me, maybe looked a bit more solid there, and added another kind of Sutar-esque player whose recovery runs were really good, and his just positioning was at a really high level throughout the game. Bratton, maybe that's the end of that experiment for him. I think he had his little cameo, but as you said, Lockie, Popper was made the bold choice to bring him off at halftime, which was good to see. So as a fan, you can't really be mad at that. Okay, he tried something and clearly wasn't working, or the game wasn't the right one to try him out in, and so pulled him off. So it's I don't think many people were necessarily upset at that, and it didn't look like he was playing favourites or anything like that. McGree, as you've said, I think he's nailed his spot down a fair bit there. Has looked pretty much the perfect player in that role. Hrustic had a pretty poor showing to his standard. I think hopefully he does get some more chances, then there definitely will be some more chances with Goodwin out of the next game for him to have another crack at that position.
I think that had to do with the approach as well, you have to say.
Yeah.
He didn't really have a chance to get into the game.
Oh, 100%. There wasn't he didn't play poorly, but it was just nothing was working in that area of the field, really. You had a lot of the ball between Miller straight down wide, not much interplay between Miller and Hrustic necessarily, so you didn't get to see too much. I still think he will nail down that spot. But then, you're leaving players like Goodwin out in this system. I think, taking a leaf out of Japan's book, actually, in this match, they played a similar setup to us, but they do have, those wingers as their wing backs, players in Mitoma and Doan who are traditional wingers, for their club sides, but did perform the role, similar to our players did against China, where they did, they spent most of their time further forward, but they also were tracking back and covering. So I think the window's there for us to play, more of the winger there. Maybe, Jordy Boss is perfect for that position as well. So I don't think his position is necessarily in the air. But maybe, maybe you see a good win there. Maybe you see, Aaron Kunde out wide on the right as well. Maybe the tactical discipline is something that Tony, is looking for, and the holding shape, and especially against Japan, it was definitely not the setup, but it could be in future games where we're expecting a bit more of the ball and we go for that, more attacking lineup. Because, we think of it as a dichotomy, our players are a defender or the attacker, but the reality is that everyone on the field defends. Everyone is capable. They're all professional players who can play a role, and it's more about, the tactical knowledge from the individual, rather than you're a defender because you can tackle better. It's not really about that. But people, make it out as if it is. So some flexibility, as we were mentioning before in the lineup with Christian there. So, but yeah, and then again, you said hopefully Yangi does recover, because we were a little thin up top. Popper's gone to Velupile off the bench there to come on up top, but we're missing a bit of Yangi's versatility and utility, and I think he has shown that he can hold the ball up really well in tight spaces if he needs to. And also get in behind. I think he'll be pretty good as the focal point of this side.
And then, Jacob, to put this into context with some of the other results in the group, a 0-0 draw between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, which had a missed penalty from Salim Al-Dasari. He's actually missed a few recently for Saudi Arabia. He's been costly. Yeah, so, a draw there, all of a sudden they're equal on 5 points as well. With Australia, we have to hedge on goal difference and we're in second. All is right with the world.
Yeah, honestly, couldn't have asked for things to go better in those other matches, to be perfectly honest. The way that it sets things up for Australia is pretty solid, and obviously fate's in their own hands now with this game against Saudi Arabia in Melbourne. It's going to be the big one, and I don't think, back when these fixtures were announced, where they were being hosted and stuff, I don't think people were looking at that as potentially being the big one. I think it was this Japan game, but managed to come through the Japan game unscathed. And so it's a case of now Saudi Arabia is the big one because of that. Haven't thrown away that chance at qualification by not taking points away in Japan, which is obviously a tough ask, but managed to do it. And now another tough ask with Saudi Arabia. But like you said, Lockie, they've been, quite costly in front of goal recently, missing penalties and things like that, and just not taking their chances. So, I mean, they're going to be coming up against an Australian side that defensively we've seen how strong they can be and how resolute they can be. And it was a mistake in the China game, poorly tracked runner and a lost aerial duel that leads to a goal there. And it's an own goal against Japan. So it's a side that I think Saudi Arabia, they're going to struggle to break down the Australian backline. And that's going to offer things up, I think. If the Tony can, I suppose, sort of shore up who's going to be playing in those 10 roles. Obviously, Goodwin's out. So does that mean Ristich comes back in? Perhaps he has a better game because it might be, Australia might have a bit more of the ball. Who knows? Or does he try someone else in there? Does he try Nesta in there again? I'd probably say no. But you can't quite be certain right now. But he's got to get that combination right, because I think that's what was really missing in this game against Japan. Obviously, Duke was very quiet, but I think that's because he just didn't have anything to do, right? He wasn't getting the deliveries in, and there wasn't a lot of space being opened up for him to make runs in behind or anything like that either. So I think if Popper can nail down those 10 spots, and I think McGree's probably pretty ironed on there, I don't see him losing that spot. But that other side, that right-hand side, whoever slots in there is going to have a lot of work to do against Saudi Arabia. And I think that's going to be the real key point in this game, is whoever goes in there has to do a good job because the result is probably going to depend on it. But yeah, no, I mean, things have panned out pretty well, especially considering it was all doom and gloom before the China game of, new manager, Arnie wasn't very good at the end there. Other players still, down on their luck and a bit unconfident. And then, you get a win against China, you get a good draw against Japan. Things are in Australia's hands now. And it all comes down to this game in Melbourne, which is going to be so big.
It does. And Christian, we shouldn't forget, though, that if we had won those first two games, then we're going to be equal with Japan on 10 points, and we're going to have an even bigger margin and maybe push for top of the group. Yeah. So there's obviously still levels to it, but yeah, the clashes against Saudi Arabia, and there still is 6 games to go as well. So we know things can be made up in different areas, but the importance of that game now is just so massive.
You have to admit, though, looking at the table, it's been a pretty underwhelming group, to be honest, in terms of the quality, because you arrive in it saying this is going to be the group of death, right? And 5 teams out of the 6 haven't won more than one game. When you look at it from that perspective, it's been pretty dour, to be quite honest. Saudi should have won a couple of games, have dropped a lot of points that they should have picked up. So it just goes to show that this group is very vulnerable, and perhaps that second position is more alive than we perhaps gave it credit for after the second game when we drew to Indonesia away from home. So yeah, definitely the second spot has opened up a bit more given Saudi's recent struggles. But yeah, it all counts to nothing if we lose that game against Saudi at home in Melbourne, because remember, the remaining 2 games of the Socceroos is against Japan and Saudi. So, Australia really has to start picking up points here in these next few games. Otherwise, you don't want to be relying on those final 2 fixtures to be scrambling to getting points to secure that top 2 berth.
Yeah, good point. All right, that'll do for the Australian men's national team for a couple of weeks until we resume back in November. For now, we're going to go back to the A-League. We've got 3 teams to finish off our season preview. If you're listening to this on Friday, the league is underway tonight, and if you're listening to it after Friday, the league is already underway. So very exciting times. We're going to kick it off, and I'm going to lead us off tonight with Melbourne City, a team that has faced a lot of instability in the last few years. You've got Patrick Kisnorbo and Rado Vidicic, their previous 2 coaches, who both left in their respective seasons within 6 weeks. Obviously, Patrick because of his abundant success in the club, and Rado for his lack of it. But it's really just sent the team into a lot of instability. And I probably wouldn't argue that when Aurelio Vidmar came in last year that he really lit the world on fire. Of course, he did recover that side to go and play finals, which is an achievement in itself. But between a pretty good performance as coach and the need for just some continuity in their staff, they made the decision to not extend him, but sign him permanently for 2 years. So that's where we are. And in terms of their squad, it's a lot of rotation. So obviously 3 big outs, which we have to talk about. Jamie McLaren, the league and club all-time top goal scorer. Curtis Good, who's played the most games for Melbourne City in the heart of defence. It was always just an ever-present rock throughout those sides. And then Tolga Arslan as well, who, personally believe was the best player in the league last year. I know there's a lot of people that would agree with me. Left in, of course, somewhat conspicuous circumstances. The club very publicly said that they were disappointed in his request to leave the club, but they reluctantly agreed to let him go. The rumour was that he wanted to go play closer to home, which for the record is Germany, and now he's plying his trade in Japan with Senfrecce Hiroshima, of course returning to Australia in a couple of weeks as well to play Sydney FC. But I'm sure that probably raised a few eyebrows. They wouldn't be happy with how he left, but the fact is he's gone. And that's 3 very crucial players that have walked out the door. You add in the likes of Hamza Saki, who left halfway through last year. That was another very key player. And, the players that I've brought in, Nathaniel Atkinson returns from Hearts of Midlothian in Scotland. That's a good in. They brought in Kai Truen from the Brisbane Roar, who was a really good young centre-back. And Aziz Bayic comes back from Al Nassr, where he was on loan for the second half of last year. So that also disrupted their campaign last time out. But you're going to lose a lot of quality like that. You're going to suffer. So when we talk about expectations, unless you're really high up on the expectations like a Victory or a Sydney, most teams are kind of showing the line, we're there to compete for finals. We want to be there to make finals. That should be City's aim, but I think it's going to be tough for them this year. And we know that they've had this streak, Christian, of qualifying for every final series since the City Football Group has come into control of the club. I think they're at danger potentially of losing that streak this year.
I'm in full agreement with you. I think for my predictions, I had him in 8th or 9th. I just don't see them making that top 6 because of the changes you mentioned. And the big lingering question for me heading into this season for Melbourne City is the striker position. Jamie McLaren obviously leaving. You got Max Caputo out for a substantial amount of time. I think another 2 to 3 months, I believe. So
it's actually not that long. Sorry to cut you off. They put out an injury report today.
Okay.
I think 2 to 3 weeks, that kind of mark. So not as bad.
Yeah, a few weeks ago it was supposed to be severely worse than what it's been reported now. So at least that's positive news. So at least they can get him back sooner. But he's still young. He's inexperienced. He does have a lot of potential and talent. We've seen that in Spurs last season where he actually got the nod in a few games to start ahead of McLaren. So he's in a position where he can thrive. But besides that, you feel as though where are the goals going to come from for this City side? Arslan departing, he was such an integral part in that final third. And for you, Lockie, I just want to ask you in terms of the goals. Do they need to find another replacement mid-year, or can they survive with the squad that they have now at their disposal?
So the word on Max Caputo was throughout the off-season that they were kind of towing the line and trying to decide whether that they were going to give him the responsibility to score all their goals. Obviously, the injury happens, and after he went down, they brought in, what's his name? Jonathan Cohen, the Israeli. I believe he's been described as a winger/striker. So I've heard different things about how they might set up. Maybe he'll play out wide. Maybe there'll be a false 9 kind of situation without a striker until Caputo comes back. Obviously, long term, I think you want that young Australian leading the line. So perhaps the lineup looks a little bit different early on to what it does a little bit later. I actually want to make a correction. The Max Caputo line was 5 to 6 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks was Emin Durakovic, but also Matt Leckie as well, a couple of weeks at the start of the season. So that they have a few injuries out. Alessandro Lapane is out to the new year as well. So what we see in round one is probably going to be a little bit different to what we see towards the middle and back end of the year. Hopefully, if all those players can stay fit, we saw the troubles they had with Matt Leckie and Andrew Naboo out at the start of last season. It really didn't allow them to get off to a very good start. So hopefully, long-term Max Caputo is the answer. And of course, they've signed a bunch of academy players up as well, so that they're going with this trend of the A-League and recruiting that youth and really trying to go for the future. So whether he can do it or not is a different question, but I think they will be relying on Caputo for that role.
And do you think that Vidmar, look, he was fantastic back in the day for Adelaide United, obviously took them to the Asian Champions League final, but since then has sort of had a bit of a spotty history as a head coach. And obviously you're correct, he righted the ship for City at the end of last season and managed to get them back playing finals, but it does sort of seem still like he's maybe not quite the man that City wanted for the job. It just was happenstance that he was there. It offered that stability. Do you think that, he's going to have what it takes to be able to take this side, which is perhaps a little undermanned in certain areas, as you've just mentioned, and there's a lot of unknowns about it? Do you think he's actually going to be the person who'll be able to take them to any form of success or even, make that finals? I know that's the expectation, especially from fans, because that's what they've come to know from the side. But do you think that it's within Vidmar's capability to do that?
I think that's the big question. And I think that's actually the source of a lot of uncertainty, especially amongst Melbourne City fans, as to how well this squad is actually going to perform. They have some amazing pieces in there. Obviously, Matt Leckie, Naboo, Marco Tilio, hopefully is lining up for a really big season. Hopefully he can stay injury-free. He's got a full preseason under his belt, as is Beige, of course, and Jamie Young in goals. It really feels like it does fall down to Vidmar. And to be honest, I don't know. He was at Adelaide United. He left rather infamously, and then he's bounced around between Thailand and Singapore, like the top teams in those leagues. But around Asia, and now he's come back to Melbourne City. A full preseason definitely helps. You're going to get a better read on him and how he wants to set up his team compared to last year when he had to join in after, what was it, 2 games, right? So you essentially had the full season, but you didn't have all the prep work. So to recover the team from that humiliating loss in Adelaide to go and play finals was a great effort. And I have no idea if he can do it again this year, but I think that is, the big question.
Yeah,
I think the defense could possibly be, amongst the best in the league, just on paper. I think the fullbacks, you've got 2 there with Socceroos experience, bringing Atkinson back, who's had an up and down time in Scotland, but Beige there provides the experience. You've got, some centre backs that look to be in the right age bracket. So Ferreira is 28, looks to be a good pickup. Cyprian has been, pretty serviceable whenever he's been around. You've got good backups there in Kai Truan, as you mentioned earlier. I think it does look like, and especially under Vidmar, this team can be pretty solid at the back. Do you think that will be a big strength for them coming into this season?
They definitely do have a good back four. I think the inclusion of Atkinson helped. I'm not sure if Callum Talbot had the best time in preseason. I saw a couple of highlights. I know he was responsible for giving up a few goals. So Atkinson coming in is good. Ferreira, you mentioned, which he'll be a cult legend as soon as he steps on the field for this first time, purely because of that incredible neck tattoo that he's got, the diamond straight on there. He looks like a bit of a monster. Of course, that's an impression without having seen him play football, so we'll have to wait and see. But, he's one of those wild cards. Could be good, of course, as is Beige. We know his quality. And then, as you say, Samuel Cyprian can do a job. I think they start Kai Truan. I think if you're making a move for him and bringing him down, signing him, I think on a 3-year deal or something like that, you're playing him and you're building him up. And they've obviously consciously chosen to go that direction. They're Melbourne City. They can sign some bigger players if they wanted to. But I think they're reading the time. So I wouldn't quite have them up as the best back four in the league, but there's certainly a lot of quality in there. So if they can get organised and, Vidmar can get them ticking over, then Yeah, I think they do have some pieces that could be potentially quite solid at the back. All right, that'll do for Melbourne City. We're going to head over to, I don't know, what do you say, the other side of Melbourne, the west of Melbourne. Jacob, Western United out in Tarneit this year, finally.
Yeah, the ever-expanding west of Melbourne as it continues the suburban sprawl out there. And yeah, Western find themselves slap bang in the middle of it all with their new Ironbark Field. Ironbark Fields. That's really the big talking point for Western, right? It's all this off-the-field stuff is, it does seem like finally the club is starting to find its roots, which it's taken obviously a number of years to get to this point. And let's not forget as well that the stadium, having their own stadium, this whole thing was the promise upon which they were granted access to, well, not access to, but they were admitted into the A-League in the first place, right? Was that we're going to have our own stadium in 2-3 years' time. Well, it's 5 years later and they've only finally just managed it. So, but no, it's good to see that. And I think that that's going to be huge for them going forwards. I don't think we're going to see the implications of it immediately straight away, right? We didn't see it really in the back end of last season. Their crowd numbers stayed about the same. But I think you're in an expanding suburban area. There are going to be more and more people moving there that are going to want things to do that don't require driving all the way into Melbourne every time. You've got a team in your back garden with their own stadium. It's small. It's exactly what people are asking for these A-League sides in terms of stadiums, right? Small, intimate, just perfectly sized and adequate. And that's exactly what Western have got. And the other off-field thing that's happened recently as well, and it's happened since I've written the preview piece for them, but they've announced a partnership with Red Bull Australia as well to be official energy drinks partners. And there's a lot of talk about, does this mean they're being taken over by Red Bull? No. It's a sponsorship. It's not. I don't think this has anything to do with the sporting wing of Red Bull. It's the marketing side of the energy drink company, because they're obviously two different, very, very different things. And so, yeah, look, it's a good step in the right direction, though, for Western that they're able to secure these sorts of investments and partnerships. That's a big company. That's huge to get.
Do you mean to say that Jurgen Klopp didn't handpick Western United? Are you sure? I think, it's pretty smart guy.
If that's how it comes out, And then
I was going to say, are we expecting a high press now?
Philosophy
John Aloisi?
Well, no, I mean, John Aloisi's contract is running out, so maybe we know who his successor is going to be now. But no, it's off the field, things seem to be going in the right direction for Western, but it's on the field where things are a little bit less assured. I mean, they've brought in some quality players. I mean, obviously, Hiroshi Ibasuki is the big standout there. Big issue for them last season was converting chances and scoring goals. And now they've got somebody who has proven consistently at the A-League level that they can do that. Not every game, right? Ibasuki is not the striker who scores one a game. He's a striker who scores 4 goals across 5 games, and they'll come in, a brace or a hat-trick here or there and things, and who has the ability to change a single game like that. He might not be the most consistent over the whole season, but he can score goals and he can finish chances. And I really like him in build-up as well. I think with the profile that he has, he holds the ball up really well and allows the wingers and the other attacking players to get involved in the attacking third, which is, massive. And for a team like Western, where they've got a bit of quality in certain areas, they've obviously got Angus Thurgate in the midfield. Matt Grimaldi as well looked fantastic at the back end of last season. I think he's going to have a huge season. This could be his real breakout one for him. Being able to enable these guys to come into the game, that's going to be huge. And they've also got Noah Botic up front as well, young striker, spoken about in similar veins to Max Caputo, right? With, being young, unproven, hasn't really got his chance, and played last season, sort of interchanged with Michael Royce as the other person up front, and neither of them could really make anything happen for Western, which is why Basuki's come in. So perhaps that opportunity for sort of a mentorship type thing is going to be huge for Botic. But I mean, the issues for Western lie a bit further back, and it's in their defence. And I still don't think that they've really done anything to improve defensively. I think Ben Caruccio is still going to have a lot on his plate to try and ensure that what is a really inexperienced backline. They've got some talented players there. Bijan Kutleshi is somebody they've just brought in, 15-year-old from Melbourne City, who you were talking about, Lockie. He is one of the bright young defenders in Australia, and everybody's talking about him, but he's 15 years old. It's a case of there's still a lot of work to do to get him to be at the level where he can not just play for, Australia, but play for Western United in the first place. So, that is still the big issue for Western, I think. They let Jacob Track go, who, was part of a not great Adelaide defence, comes to Western United as part of a not great Western United defence. Maybe he's just not good for teams with United in the name. And but no, it's good to let these players go, the players who aren't up to standard, but they've not, I don't think, brought anybody really in who is going to elevate that level much greater, or at least very evidently. So it's going to be difficult there. And then obviously the coach, John Aloisi, you have to understand that, yes, he won the championship for Western. And yes, he was carried a lot by, some fantastic performances by the likes of Diamanti and Prijovic. But at what point does, this loyalty to your coach not pay off? It's last season was not great for Western, and I think Aloisi really struggled tactically making adjustments during games. I noticed he just often didn't. Even when there were glaring errors on the pitch that were happening consistently, he stuck with it, a bit like Tony Popovic does, except Aloisi didn't have the squad depth to be able to cover for that, and it meant that they were exposed frequently, and it was often these crazy games that went late into added time and things where they were getting results because they just didn't really have that ability to adjust things. And I think some of that does come back to Aloisi. But then, he won the championship with them. So, we know what he is capable of as a coach. So I think that there's sort of this dichotomy there of he can be a good coach. He can be not very good. There's also questions about he doesn't back the youth enough, but I think he's going to have to this season, just looking at their squad. They don't have a huge amount of experience depth available to them. So I think that perhaps, his hand is going to be forced there to play some youngsters, which I, for one, am a big fan of. He's got, I mentioned Mac Grimaldi, but Sebastian Pasquale is another one in the midfield who is a fantastic young player. So, they're really struggling on the field, and I just don't see enough improvement in the squad that they do have to be able to take them any higher than they managed last season.
So I wonder about the dynamic at Western United and, John Aloisi's coaching tenure. We hear so much about the quality of the Western United youth, and I'm not talking about like the players that are young in the first team, but like the academy players that are coming up and just the pure quality of the kids that they have out there. This feels to me still like it's Western United T-minus 2 years. They got a little while to go until their new stadium comes. They got a little while to go to this supposedly generational crop of youth players crack into the first team. Is John Aloisi perhaps just a little bit of a bridge to get to that year one in the new stadium with the kids coming through when the Western United brand really starts to tick over? And how do you think he might feel about being that guy that is just kind of the custodian of the team until then?
Yeah, it's a tough spot because it's clear that, if a team is properly rebuilding and they know the coach that they want, they're going to get them in early because that gives the best opportunity for them to embed their style of play in the team. But Aloisi's contract finishes at the end of this year, and there doesn't seem to be many indications that it's going to be renewed. It's obviously a possibility, and I think if he can work miracles and have a really good season, then there's no reason not to. But it definitely seems like, he's sort of a stopgap at the moment. There's no point bringing in a new coach and then him failing and losing the faith of the fans and stuff, even though it's early in the rebuild process. You stick with the guy who did bring you that championship, but has had a rough last season, wasn't fantastic the season before that. Then at least if he's let go, fans are going to go, oh yeah, smart move. And then you can bring in your guy for that year one and hopefully things work out. But then on the counter to that is, you do want to bring in your new guy as early as possible. So it could even be a case of Aloisi doesn't get off to the hottest of starts and then he's on the hot seat because they're going to want to bring in somebody who can have some time with these youngsters in the youth system, but also, establish a culture in the first team of, of competitiveness and of the way that they want to play. So it's a tough one for Aloisi, and I can't imagine what it would be like to try and coach a team that you're not even sure you're going to be at next season, because you obviously want success. You probably realistically realizes he's not going to win the league. I mean, it would take a lot to do that. It would be amazing if he did, but I just don't see it happening. He's going to be torn here between wanting success, but then knowing that he might not be back next year anyway. So that's a really tough spot for him to find himself in. And I think that's where, Western, like I said, off the field things are going great, but on the field they're sort of struggling and in a bit of no man's land because they've not completely blown the squad up, right? They still have a few older pieces, and they've brought in a few older pieces as well. Ibasuki is not a young guy. That suggests that they're not, necessarily looking all the way to the future. They're looking in maybe 1 or 2 years when he might still be around. But then it's not a case of they're definitely looking to win now, right? Because if they were definitely looking to win now, they'd have done a lot more in that transfer window to recruit experienced, talented players. So yeah, it's I think at least with Western, that reflects their coaching situation quite well. But off the field, things look great. So yeah, it's a silly one to be in. And half of it's good, half of it's not. I think just for Western fans this season, as I wrote for the website, you just got to find the silver linings here. You're going to see some talented youngsters coming through. You got your own stadium, and things are going really well. For the commercial side of things and the football operations side of things for the club, and it seems like the future of the club looks bright. So that's the positive to take from it, I guess.
Do you think the sentiment seems to be a lot of people, including all of us who had Western 12th in our prediction video, bang on. I don't know. I think we saw at the end of last season, when finals was clearly out of the equation and the pressure was off in a sense, that I think a lot of these youngsters were starting to get their chance, and the team looked kind of unrecognizable in the first couple of games. I remember, not knowing many names in the lineup, and I don't know. I just think, do you think that might be a sign of the lack of signings this season may be a sign that Aloisi has found talent there and did experiment a bit in the last season, and so he backs the youngsters enough to play a big part this season. I think that's maybe one of the reasons that explains this lack of signing.
I definitely think so, yeah. And I mean, it also sort of reflects the trend league wide of squads skewing younger and younger this season than they have done before. But no, you're definitely right in that they did look better when the young guys were playing last season. But how much of that is because it was the young guys that were playing? How much of it was that, their fate was sealed, so there was nothing really to lose and they could just play football? I do think that you take a risk when you're playing a young squad, right? And this is something that Adelaide suffered from last season, is that you're going to have that gulf between the young guys and the really veteran, experienced guys, and there's no middle ground there. So if there's inconsistency in performances, there's nobody to shore the side up and be the spine or the backbone of the squad. And I don't think that Western have that really. There's nobody in there that you can identify as being right there, the one that's going to play consistently well throughout the season. You got players who are going to be fantastic for some games, not great in others. But I guess that's the risk you run when you do play a squad that has a lot of younger players, a lot of older players, and not a lot of middle ground. And yeah, whether it's something that Aloisi sort of, recognised and thought, well, let's take that chance, right? Anything can happen. And perhaps they put a good run together. Yeah, maybe that is the case, but it's certainly an interesting observation to make. And I think that, yeah, it does reflect what we're seeing league-wide, but in a much more almost sort of dramatic scale here for Western.
I think what strikes me most about this team is the lack of experience, because we touched on, obviously the project moving forward is investing more in the youth side of it. They don't necessarily need to win now. That's not the objective for the club. It's moving forward in the next 2 to 3 years' time. But looking at this squad here, there's only 3 players above the age of 30. Like, that's crazy. And then the rest are like, there's 17 players 22 years or under out of the 37, I think, man squad it is. So will that, I guess, what's the word? Will that sort of, hamper the squad moving forward, or will that derail some of the youngsters in terms of not only their confidence, but their development? Because if you don't have guys in there with the amount of relative experience to help guide them through their journey, in the senior squad, then how are they supposed to improve and develop in, 2 to 3 years' time when Western are supposed to, supposedly compete, at the top and be in a better position?
Yeah, no, spot on, because this is a situation where it's really sink or swim for a lot of these guys, and the best of the best are going to be able to overcome it, and they'll still play okay. But the guys who, you would expect to have average, decent careers at a professional level could well struggle, and it could take a couple of years to sort of recover from that. Because you're right, when you're a young guy coming into a team, you want to have a presence around you that could reassure you and can show you the ropes and, give you a bit of guidance and help you out when things are going tough. And like you mentioned, yeah, Western just don't have that. I mentioned Bengaruccio earlier is somebody who's going to have to do a lot to help mentor that young defence. The midfield is very young indeed. There's not a whole lot of experience there. And I think Angus Slogate might be the oldest at 24. I could be wrong with that.
But he looks 40. I don't know if that's...
Well, maybe that'll, it's a bit of a placebo in that they'll see that he looks like he's older than he is. But no, he's only like 24 or something. Yeah. And then you got Ibasuki up front. Obviously, is 32 or 33, I think.
33,
33.
Equal oldest player in that team.
Yeah. It's a crazy situation. And like I said, the best of the best will be fine because they can rely on their natural talents to get them through it. But those players that might need a bit of guidance are going to really struggle. And I think that this is where I was saying it doesn't seem like Western have really looked fully towards the future because they haven't built that sort of mentorship within the squad that you need if you're going to want to develop these young players. I don't want to refer to Adelaide United again because I do it a lot, but it reminds me of 2016-17 for Adelaide United, where a lot of the really strong quality veteran players were let go. And it was the likes of McGree and Jordan O'Doherty and Bengaruccio actually who came through in that season, completely unknown youngsters. And McGree was fine, right? Because he could rely on his natural talents. But, Jordan O'Doherty, Bengaruccio, it took them a couple of seasons to build into it and to become the players that they are because they didn't have that support around them. And I think it could be the case here with Western, where some of the top names that they've got, the youngsters, Abel Volaty is another one. I mentioned Pasquale and Grimaldi. I think they'll be okay, right? Because they've got the natural talents to do it. But some of the other guys who are a bit more unknown, that don't have people talking about them, could struggle because there's not that sort of squad harmony there to really help them out.
All right. Well, Jacob, I'm glad you're catching yourself on the Adelaide United references now. It means I don't have to call you up on them. Thank you. To round out our 13th and finals team for this A-League preview, it is the Perth Glory. We caught up with Matt Olsen. All right. Well, joining us now to cover Perth Glory is Matt Olsen, all the way over in WA. Time differences made it a little bit of a challenge for us, Matt, but we've made it work. Thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I love being a part of things like this and being able to give this perspective, which would be so rare for people like yourself to come across. So it's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Perth Glory. Tell us about them.
Well, I think firstly, to understand kind of where the club are at, we have, I think, different levels of, I guess you could say, some sort of authority or devotion to the club that kind of starts at the very top and goes all the way down to, people deciding whether to renew their membership. And I think it's fair to say that every single level of the club up that pyramid, there is a heavy amount of dissatisfaction. This is a club that has not made the finals since 2019-2020 season. Joel Chianese scored against the Phoenix in that last finals win, swept aside by Sydney FC. And of course, that was in the midst of COVID, in front of an empty... what was it called at the time? Bankwest Stadium, I suppose, or Combank Stadium.
Yeah.
And the dawn since then has been, what change is going to come? How can we adapt with it? And then this change comes, and then that change comes, and then, you just don't know when the toxic cycle is ever going to end. And having fortunately spent probably the longest kind of pre-season / off-season that I've ever spent in the embrace of the club, for the first time, I can comfortably say, speaking to marketing staff, speaking to players, speaking to coaches, speaking to people widely within the organisation, even some stakeholders that I met at the launch, people who are very sort of established mainstream media, the West Australian, who are obviously very, very closely associated with the club, down to, people who represent A-League's media themselves. All of that has been echoed into really the idea that previous toxic cycle that the club had been feeling, a lot of that has been unbroken. And, the friends of mine that I have that are fans of the club, maybe they always want to go in with, optimism and say, it's different. This is our year. Things are finally going to change. The top six is calling our name. And I can tell you that when they're saying that this time, there's an air of truth in that. And I think that, the one thing you really have to appreciate when it comes to understanding where Perth Glory are at as a football club is simply understanding the changeover in ownership and in management, because it really all stems from there. Ross Peligra is a figure that, is certainly one of the single most hardworking people you'll ever meet. and his vision for what he wants to do. He is thinking long term, and there's no reason to not believe in his vision, because ultimately all the people around him are Australian football people that care about the Australian football product and care about a club that's in a single city club, that they care about that product growing to be something where football is talked about ahead of other sporting codes, not because of an inherent rivalry, but because we want football to be bigger and better than what it can be, and what it is. So ultimately, I just think that you have to really take in the whole picture from every perspective and realize that change is afoot. So really starting from there, you're then looking at the fact that the squad is probably molded with a lot of younger talent that I think actually is catching the eye of people over East, where in the past someone like a Daniel Benny, who was very successful last season, no one was really talking about him, no one gave him his dues, and he ended up in the championship. You kind of flip that to this season, and people are talking about Faisal, people are talking about Blair, people are talking about these players that can make an impact, and that's massive. So then you combine that with the homecoming. Brandon O'Neill's had his issues with the club, has decided to come back, because he can see that change afoot that's happened. Someone like Josh Riston always wanted to come home, got his chance to come home, and ended up obviously going down to the country town where he was born to play his first game back in purple, which was an immense moment as well. So just a lot of vibes there, a lot that's really adding to the squad dynamic, being better than ever. And then when you really get into the tactics and you really get onto the pitch, I think that you have to trust the vision of a David Drilic going forward. So yeah, if I'm to be unbiased and have the take on what Perth Glory are, look, obviously you're probably still talking about a mid-table club, but I think it's very hard for me as someone that's seen it all really play out from start to finish, from talking to Alan Stajic at the end of season function last year to being in a position where everyone has a different perspective and everything really has changed. So, I just think from that perspective, it's hard not to appreciate and hard not to get that hint of optimism, but there is a long way to go. And, by equal measure, people are aware of that.
Fascinating. It's interesting. You took probably, 3.5 minutes there until you actually talked about, anything on pitch related to the actual football itself. Do you think that's representative of perhaps what fan expectations might be? That obviously the way they finished last season, a couple of really bad performances to finish it off with the wooden spoon, it's hard to get a lot worse than that in terms of footballing results. But do you feel like there's a general acceptance that maybe it's not, obviously it's bigger than a 1 year thing, but perhaps results this year don't mean a whole lot as long as we still see those off the pitch kind of themes moving in the right direction?
I think the one thing to that degree that you would have to kind of argue is, look, the A-League is the A-League. I think when people talk about rebuilding clubs, when people talk about long-term vision, okay, yes, like in the literal sense, that's what's going on. But the A-League is built in such a way that these things don't actually really matter. And the one thing I was really kind of proud of from a personal perspective, in the piece that I wrote for Round Ball Australia was that, when you look at the turnaround from Kenny Lowe to Tony Popovich, no one looked at Tony Popovich's appointment and all the incredible signings that he made and said, okay, so how long is the project going to last for? No, they looked at it and said, rightly so, this is a team that's probably going to do incredibly well in the competition, and they did. So I think to that extent, when David Drilic comes out and says, I know what it means to have these players on my back, when Stan Lazaridis, who's someone I didn't even mention in that starting address, which is really surprising, when he's hell for leather with a dead serious face comparing Abdul Faisal to Mohamed Salah and really believing it, that is the kind of thing where you have to look at it and say, of course this is a group that can be in the top six. Of course they're going to go into the season believing that. At the end of the day, this is a salary cap league where everyone's on an even foot, and this is a pretty bloody good squad that people have a right to believe in. So from that perspective, I mean, yeah, it's probably a lot of optimism that a lot of fans over here are seeing, and rightfully, being very, very wary of, but also wary of the fact that, yeah, there are a lot of dynamics that have changed, and it is hard to change that overnight. So, it's kind of one of those things that I think, it'll probably flow one way or the other. After a potentially bad loss, the conversation very much becomes, well, look at what the club has had to go through. If if they're won their first 3 or 4 games of the season, what is the conversation going to be about? It's look at how good of a job Stan Lazaridis has done. Look at the board. Look at someone like Anthony Radic and his impact. It really becomes about how well the off season moves were for the club to already be in this position. So it's just funny in that these can be really fickle things, but I think it's something that again, you can have an eye to kind of respecting and seeing happen in this competition with the nature of the way it is.
In terms of your optimism for the team, how much does David Zrilic play a part in that? Because he is not your average first-year senior coach in the A-League. He has had a tutelage as an assistant manager all around the world that would be the envy of most coaches stepping into their first full-time senior role at a professional level.
Yeah, look, I'm the kind of person that I can respect that there's probably a lack of depth in the A-League. So when we've had the likes of Ruben Zakovic step up, when Richard Garcia got his chance, on face value, I actually really respected those guys, and I could actually in real time see what they were doing. And I maintain that Ruben Zakovic, he's over at Brisbane now. He is someone that I think could still have a really good future in the sport. I think Richard Garcia was undone by the change being so dramatic from going from Tony Popovich to his tutelage. It was going to be hard work, and he wasn't at fault for the downfall of the club. It would be a ridiculous suggestion, but obviously the timing was in such a way that he couldn't sort of produce. And I think now that we're at the opposite end of the scale, where the club is at dire straits, and you've got a figure like David Zrilic to come and pull it up. Yeah, I mean, he's immediately kind of said, time and time again, that I think there's a few factors that have made this the right timing for him, which is actually a really fascinating way to put it. I think starting with a lot of the budget cuts and the fact that this season, by many, and certainly by me on numerous occasions now, I think I've compared this season to 2020 to 21, where we were out of that COVID cycle, but there was no money, and Fox had sort of stopped contributing to the league in any really meaningful way. So we had a huge budget cut, and as a result, we ended up seeing a lot of great young talent come through. And I just, when I'm sitting here watching the Adam Bagarias and the Kwan and Goes and guys like Faisal, who you'll hear us mention over and over again for a very good reason. When I see those guys, I think, well, this is their time to shine, And if you cast your mind back to 2021, it was the Mariners who ended their cycle at the time. They really turned into the behemoth that they are now in that season through a lot of very smart recruitment. And David Zrilic working in academies that, they've obviously got all the budget and the resources, but you still have to work within very restricted means. Just because the Red Bull football system or, Chicago Fire, for example, where he's worked as well, just because they are really resourced in the environment that they are, doesn't mean that you don't have to be really, really mindful of your resources and really, really mindful of how to stack up the talent pool that you have when you're running an academy for a club like that. And the exact same concept applies, right? Because in a literal sense, when we're going through a lot of those financial concerns and we are playing younger players, our senior teams basically are like academy systems where the end goal is to try and get, your name out there and try and get, into youth national teams, to get a move to Europe, whatever it be. And I think a lot of that is a transferable skill that will count just immeasurably for him. And he's assessed that, and he's really thought about it and thought, okay, do you know what? Now is the time to do this, and to do it in the shadow of a lot of former friends who he was, some he was teammates with in the Socceroos, some who, he played alongside in the A-League, and even part of the NSL period. And he's assessed the whole thing and really realized for himself that this is the mark he can make. It's also, for me, knowing his smarts, knowing his football IQ, the decision to me tells me that they are a team that can get off the ground running and really have that big Mariners-esque impact, which is an exciting thought, but not one that you want to say is guaranteed.
So when you say get off the mark there, obviously that's in a seasonal sense. One thing Adam Taggart spoke about at the season launch, and you wrote about this in your preview, was the fact that because they have so many fresh faces coming in, getting them all together and working together well, perhaps really early in the season might be a little bit of a challenge. Do you see that being a hampener to maybe their early form?
I think a lot of interpersonal relationships define, things like their defensive fragility and things like that have been at the cornerstone of a lot of problems that Perth Glory have faced. And I think I can't really speak for him completely, but I think when you're talking about gelling together and being in a good mental state, obviously that's separate from your raw talent that you possess. And I look at the recruitment of Lewis Kanga and Lockie Barr as the two centre backs there, as people that they don't. It's very obvious that they don't have a functioning relationship. One can barely speak English. The other has just moved to WA and has had to already travel 2 or 3 hours to go to his first game, right? So there's a lot of warming up and getting used to it in that way. And that'll happen for a squad that's newly assembled no matter what. But I don't think that necessarily means that you're guaranteed to struggle just because you don't really know, the people that you're with as well as you maybe should in a professional sporting environment with the way it's engaged. So I think that comment is certainly something you have to be worthy of in at least understanding that, again, just to use the word, there is technically a rebuild going on. But I think it's also something that, if the players are talented enough, I mean, if we come out and see Brendan O'Neill played his best, suitably in a role where he can actually be a bit of an anchor on the pitch, distribute well, that's just one example of something that if it goes right, then the team are ticking no matter what, right? The communication between the players, it doesn't have to be 10 out of 10 if they're playing well on the field. And I think that, raw talent is something that is quite natural to the group. And in that respect, you're really keen to see where they can go with it.
All right, great. Matt Olsen, thank you for your insight tonight. We really appreciate it.
No worries.
Well, as we alluded to earlier in the show, the APL have set out a couple of new rules and regulations for the new A-League season, headlined by the fact that goal difference is now back ahead of total wins in the ladder sorting rules. The press conference, not the press conference, the press release goes, APL consulted with fan and player groups, which is great. Do more of that. It seems like everyone's come to their sense on this one. That's been reverted. A couple of other notables, actually. We have a permanent inclusion of a concussion substitute protocol, which has a couple of very interesting implications. So this has been developed over the last few years. IFAB has ratified the rules in July into the rules of football. So each team gets one concussion substitution per match, and it can be used at any time, regardless of how many subs or substitution windows you've already used. And then your opposing team also gets an extra window and sub that can be used for any reason, not necessarily a concussion sub. So technically, if you have a concussion sub, and then your opposition then gets an extra on, uses all of theirs, and then gets a concussion sub, you could have 7 substitutions in a match, which is a bit crazy. And then when we go to the A-League women, we are going to have scenarios where the normal number of substitutions is the same as the maximum allowed subs. Sorry, I messed that up. The bench size is going to be the same as the maximum substitutes. So if you've already used all your subs and you have no more fresh players, and then you have to use your concussion substitute, Christian, you get to bring back on a player that has exited the field. So it's probably going to take several years for this incident to actually occur, but it's just another peak A-League moment in waiting.
I don't understand the 5 on the bench for the women. I mean, why couldn't they expand that a bit more? It just seems a bit odd to me that they
you got to pay more
that.
contracts.
Yeah, I see that point, but at the same time, to bring on another player if there's a concussion, it's just a bit weird. But even with the men as well, how do you even determine that there's a concussion? Because can a player just fake it in a team just for an extra substitute?
Well, that's why the opposition are awarded an extra sub, an extra window as well, is probably to try and prevent teams from just going, oh yeah, he's concussed, he's got to come off, switching it up, and that player goes on and scores a goal. The other team then get the opportunity to make a change as well. It's not like time wasting where it's one-sided. And now, even there we're seeing these massive amounts of added time being put on to try and rectify that. I think they've preempted that teams might try and game the system a bit and gone, right, we're gonna give the other side the same number of subs as you've had as well.
I think that's definitely one of the recent changes, because I don't remember that being, a factor when it first came in. But, I think this is something that's peak A-League, and we'll see some confusion. But there's already been an Australian who's kind of had issues with this in the past. I remember Ange, in one of his first Tottenham games, brought Christian Romero off, thought it was a concussion sub, but didn't do the paperwork or something quickly right, and didn't get the manager didn't do it on the sideline, so that it cost them a sub, and he was fuming. So there's definitely some room for some PK League.
I think it is important to have this protocol in place. So it does mean that the league is taking concussions seriously, which we want to see moving forward, obviously, and even in other sports, we need to see more often. But in football and the A League, it's great to see that. And then in terms of the goal difference as well, I would have actually preferred to have it the head-to-head as a number one, and then goal difference second. I like it that way better because goal difference, you can just ramp up the score against a couple of bad sides, 6 or 7-0. Head-to-head, at least it shows that that's the benchmark. And then if it can't come to head-to-head, you've got to go to goal difference the next. So I think that would be a better equation to, I guess, go forward. You guys would probably disagree.
I don't necessarily disagree. I just think we've already tried to upset the apple cart, and look how that went.
That's just how I'd go about it if I had to make a choice. But yeah.
And then you're rewarding like 1-0 wins and things like that. That was the issue we said.
But if you're
like,
just
it was for attacking football, that's how they explained it. But goal difference is goals.
But I'm saying, but if it's
1-0 wins or not.
But if it's against two teams specifically, just say City and Victory, for example, if they're on the same points, you do it head to head, and I think that's a fairer way of doing it rather than goal difference head to head. It shows that you deserve it because you've played against that team, 2 or 3 times, whatever it is, as opposed to goal difference. That's just my view on it.
I think the issue with that is that often those permutations will then be decided several weeks before the final round, but you can always make up goal difference. So it leaves for more, drama and jeopardy in the final games. I think that's one of the arguments for it. The other thing of note is the heat policy. Drinks breaks were previously capped at 90 seconds. They're now up to 180, and players are permitted to leave the field of play to find a little bit of shade, so a little bit of quality life there.
Finally.
The summer period, which dictates later start times, has also been extended by a month through to the end of March as well. So now December to March, January, February, March, 4 months. There you go. 4 months of the summer period. So no 3 p.m. kickoffs. Local time. There are a couple of tweaks because of broadcast requirements and double headers, but majority of games will be later in the day. And then Jacob, I'm sure you'll be familiar. John Moss comes in as the new head of referees at Football Australia. Almost about 300 matches in the Premier League. He's coming in to raise the standards and professionalism of officiating in Australia. It's a good
fantastic line. Look, don't even get me started on Premier League refereeing. You guys will know based on what I've put in group chats in the past when I think of that. But I mean, any efforts, I suppose, to improve refereeing in Australia is a good thing. I don't think the last few seasons, I can't remember there being, the sheer number of poor performances from referees as there have been in the past. There were games, sure, where, things didn't go very well, but I don't think that it was as consistent an issue as it has been in the past. So whether that is a case of, referees are starting to get better anyway, hopefully this does help. Obviously, you're bringing that Premier League experience with you, which is huge. And we've seen, Jared Gillett obviously do the reverse and go from Australia to England to referee in the Premier League. And it took him, what was it, a season and a half, 2 seasons or something to get to that point. He was refereeing in the Championship for a while. So it does show that just in terms of the top standard still has a long way to go here in Australia to get to that same level that it's at in the Premier League. But hopefully it's a good thing. It does feel a little tokenistic. Let's wait to see what happens here. How many times are we going to see these people appointed to positions and nothing really comes of it? Hopefully this isn't one of those, and hopefully, it just is perhaps, transparency, accountability. It's these things that I think every league in the world asks from their referees, and hopefully it's something that, we can bring in here because it will, restore faith of the fans in, the referees and the refereeing system in this country. And I think that would be a fantastic thing, but let's wait to see what he does.
I saw he left his previous role only after a couple of weeks. So I don't know. I hope he doesn't jump ship too quickly. But, as long as he's not refereeing the games himself, because I saw somebody analysed it and he came up as statistically the worst Premier League referee by, incorrect decisions. Somebody did the math, so you have to read the paper to check that. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but no, it's a good sign that we've got this. As the A-Leagues put it, this former Premier League whistleblower. Which I thought he was, he called them out on some dodgy business practices. I had to double check that it was
Well, if
a
he's a
referee.
referee, he's probably involved in those dodgy business practices.
He's retracted it, people. Look, hopefully he does come in and make an impact. Ernie Merrick, if you're listening, Chief Football Officer, we're still waiting on that technical report that was promised earlier in the year. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Before we look ahead to round one, we do want to just make a note of all the exceptional A-League content that's been coming out of everywhere at the moment. The hype for this season really is building, and it doesn't feel like we've had this kind of effort put in to promoting the league in probably the last 5 years or so since COVID. So very, very encouraging. We've got Channel 10 with their weekly kickoff show. The A-Leagues have launched a new show on Thursday as well, hosted by Max Rushton, called A-Leagues Download, which is great. And, so many other independent creators that have been getting up and about as well. So good on them, and hopefully it can continue. What we're going to do now, we're going to close off every Friday episode this year by doing this. We're going to ask our panel what is their burning question for the round ahead. So what's sitting on the tip of your tongue that hopefully the weekend's action will settle for you in your head. And I'm going to take the easy one and lead us off. My burning question is, can Douglas Costa and Juan Mata back up the hype for the Sydney Derby? There's been so much made of it. These two absolute superstars of the European game are coming into the league. We hope they set the world alight. I was listening to Ben and Steph on their podcast the other day. They were saying, they hope these guys come in and win the Johnny Warren medal and dominate games, because it's going to be the best thing for the league on the long term. And in the short term, it's Saturday night. So very excited, and hopefully they can bring the performances. Christian, what's your burning question?
Mine comes from the Victory Mariners game, and it's with Patrick Kisnorbo, how he goes about his so-called experiment with our Daniel Azzani for round one, because we saw the Australia Cup final, Nishan Volupale and Reno Piscopo play out on the wing, so without Azzani in the squad. Obviously, Azzani suspended for this game against the Mariners on Friday. So how does Kisnorbo go about it? Does he play a different formation? Does he stick with Volupale, given that he's going to be coming back from international duty with the Socceroos off a plane ride from Japan? So will he have enough time to recover? Who comes in to replace him if he decides to put Volupale on the bench? So I think there's a lot of questions for Kisnorbo to ponder. And, if it does work out well, then will Azzani be benched, in future games when he is available for selection? There's just, so many questions right now.
All right, Will?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go to the same game and ask a similar thing. My point is with Jackson is are this Mariners team ready? Have they have enough time, to gel already? And they've had a few competitive fixtures, but it just hasn't quite clicked yet. So I'll be waiting to see if it comes together in time for the grand final rematch, which will be a great game. And as we mentioned before, Sainsbury's confirmed out into the new year. So I want to see how Paul, I think Nathan Paul comes into his spot, and Caltech takes the armband. So I definitely burning question for me is if that backline looks as solid as it has been and has needed to be in the last season and the one before.
Well, mine is the hype around Perth legit? Do they deserve the hype that they're getting? I've hyped them up. I've got them finishing 6th this season. I'm just excited by them. But am I right to be excited by them? Is this idea of this Zilic press, does it matter? Is it going to work? Do they have the squad for it? Who knows? But that's why it's right on the front of my mind, because I think if they can get it right, they can be they can be a real dark horse this season, and they could push and, like I said, make finals. And I think that's really exciting. But is that excitement warranted, or is it just going to be a flash in the pan and they fall off and first game outside of the preseason and they come up against a MacArthur squad who we're expecting to be really resolute and they struggle? That's the one for me. Are Perth really deserving of all the attention that they're being given at the moment?
Yeah, fascinating. Good questions all around. If you do want to know how we think the A-League men's competition is going to shake up, we did do some predictions over on the YouTube channel, as Jacob and Christian have been referring to. There's some good moments in that, so check it out on YouTube if you want. Lastly, on the Sydney Derby, before we sign off, this kind of casually just got dropped in to one of the press conferences the other day. But reportedly, Sydney FC were offered the opportunity to sign Juan Mata and said, no, we've got Waheem already looked at to bring him in and be our number 10. We don't need Juan Mata, which is quite crazy that kind of piece of information got dropped just days out before a Sydney derby. I think that's good areas stoking the fire a little bit. It's going to be a cracking match. Really looking forward to it. Really looking forward to A-League football. It's going to be great. We're going to sit here on Monday night for Tuesday's podcast and talking about 6 games of A-League football. We haven't done that in a little while. So very exciting, but that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Will Booth, I'm taking you first off the bat here in the outro. Thank you very much.
Now you called me on. I wasn't prepared. No, good app, boys. I'll catch you for the Monday one.
Up, Christian Montegan. Or Montegan, should I call you, actually?
Montegan.
Thank you.
Yeah, Montegan, we won't go into the details. We'll save for next week to explain the story, but no, pleasure as always.
And Jacob Stevens, thank you.
Cheers, boys. That was a good one.
All right. We'll be back on Tuesday to talk A-League football. Thank you all very much for listening at home. We'll see you then. Goodbye.